a big believer that one book can change your life. And I don't just say that to be dramatic or to be a pretentious reader. I say it because I personally have the experience of reading a book that transforms my way of viewing the world, that has me adapting new habits, or just even sparks a new curiosity in my life that wasn't there before. So today I want to share not one, but 10 books that have dramatically changed my life for the better in a lot of categories. I've got health, relationships, relationship to self, money. There's something for everyone here, and I'm really excited to talk about them. And although I've talked about most of these books on my channel in some way, shape, or form, I haven't done this kind of compilation video in a really long time, and I feel like they deserve that kind of attention. So let's get into it. The first book is in a class of its own. It's really unlike any of the books I have to talk about today. It is called Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte, a proven method to organize your digital life and unlock your creative potential. This book is really the reason why I've deep dived so much into Notion, because if you don't know, Notion is a tool that you can use to write notes, to write lists, to habit track, to organize your life. And I've really transformed it into also like becoming a second brain containing all of the things that I'm learning from books, from documentaries, from podcasts, from conversations. Anything that could potentially get lost in my brain is basically like something I look at as a good thing to put into a database to store in some way, shape, or form, whether it's on Notion or not. The one compelling argument that I found so interesting about this book was he talks about how a lot of us receive pieces of information when it's not so applicable to us, but that information, that lesson, that idea might be really valuable down the road to a future you. But if it's just lost, then you might just be vulnerable to not getting that information at the right time, when if you would have just categorized and stored that information so it was ready for you when you needed it, it could actually like have impact on your life. Like for example, if you watched an interview with someone who started a really successful business, but you aren't in the place in your life where you're going to start a business, you might hear those tips and think they're great, but they kind of go in year out the other. But then one day you do start a business, and all that information, all that good stuff that could have been really valuable to you, you've lost. You don't even know to access it because it's so far removed from the present. The great thing about our digital spaces is that there are so many tools like Notion that can make it so that it's easy to find this information when we need it. Like our notes can be searchable. I think this is also a great argument for why it's great to have digital notes or some sort of digital file situation, because it just makes it easier to retrieve this information. Highly recommend this as a book to read if you want to build a second brain of your own, or you want to have a different approach to the way you organize your digital environments. Really practical stuff in here. Love. I have talked about In the Flow by Alyssa Beatty so much, not just on the internet, but in my real life. I think I've gifted this book the most out of all the books here. It's the book I recommend the most in conversations. It's just been a transformative book in shaping how I look at my health. If you've never heard of it, or you haven't caught on by the title, In the Flow, this is a book about menstruation. Historically, I think when we thought of menstruation, we think about the actual menstruation process of like having your period, but our cycle is so much more. It's actually composed of 4 distinct phases that have all different impacts on our hormone levels, our energy levels. There are different foods that are better for us at different times in our cycle, different exercises that are better for us to be doing, different work activities even to be doing based on our hormones. Like there's so much to know about how to operate to actually fit what's happening in our bodies. I like to exercise pretty regularly, and before reading this book I'd get really frustrated over the fact that I felt like I never was consistently doing intense workouts or had the capability of doing intense workouts, or times where I just felt very sluggish. And then after reading this, I realized that that usually coincided with obviously my period week, but also the days before when I was in my luteal phase. And reading this book made me realize not only is it okay, but it's actually good for me to be slowing down a bit with those intense workouts and to be shifting to more low intensity stuff that isn't going to strain me. I know in 2024 the conversation about hormone balance is more regularly talked about, and I've even seen more content about the different stages of your cycle and optimizing your life for that. When I read this book, I had no idea. This was like now 2-3 years ago that I read this book. It just allowed me to show so much more kindness towards myself and have so much more appreciation just for what my body is doing all the time. Just all around something I feel like is worth adding to your bookshelf if you are looking for an introduction into menstruation. I loved In the Flow so much that it led me even further down the path of health with The Vagina Bible by Dr. Jen Gunter. Now, this is a book that I haven't admittedly read from cover to cover, so like, why am I talking about it on this video? It's because I treat it kind of like a Bible, a dictionary, encyclopedia. It covers such a wide range of topics, but it's so much more technical and science-based than In the Flow, so I don't feel like I necessarily feel the need to read it cover to cover, but I go to this all the time to consult it about different things related to vagina health. There's actually a section here on menstrual hygiene. There's a chapter on UTIs and bladder, skin conditions, antibiotics, probiotics. I just find myself constantly consulting this. I love that it has more of that technical component to it. It takes my understanding to a new level, and I think that's just as a whole what's defining my later 20s, is wanting to deepen my understanding of my body and health and food and all that good stuff. And actually this author came out with a menstruation book called Blood recently, so I just know my understanding from In the Flow is gonna just get even more extensive with this one, so I will report back on that once I do read it. I just love that there are this kind of quality resources out there now. Like, I remember when I first got my period, I was given the You by American Girl book. I think that was what it was called. But this is really your body. In The Defining Decade by Meg Jay, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now, she talks about why your 30s are not the new 20s, that your 20s actually do matter. And even though society is trying to tell us that they are just a decade of having fun and exploring, she argues that these years are actually very impactful for shaping the direction of where your life goes, and that they should not be just taken so lightly. Now, if that sounds very like heavy and intimidating, I agree to a certain extent. I think when I read this book at 25, I'm 27 now, I wasn't sure how I felt about the tone of the book, but I will say there's so much valuable information in here that got me thinking about how, yeah, there are certain things that you decide in your 20s that do kind of start the domino effects for things later on in life. And I kind of also saw this as a real motivator for me to get clear on the habits that I want to instill as like lifelong things, because I think making them a part of my identity in my 20s will increase the likelihood that I continue those habits into my 30s and 40s. She talks about how our personalities change more during the 20-something years than at any time before or after. We know now that of any time in our life, our 20s are our best chance for change. That's because the brain is changing and the environment is changing and the rules are changing all at the same time, which means that these changes intersect and influence each other. In other words, who we are affects what we do, and what we do affects who we are over and over again. 20s are the time when people and personalities are just poised for transformation. Again and again, I have seen 20-somethings move from socially anxious to socially confident enough, or get beyond years of childhood unhappiness in a relatively short period of time. It really like emphasizes this opportunity in this decade of life where there's just so much up for grabs, and that I think like means that if we just let the years go by without experimenting within them and making progress within certain areas of our life, then we're really missing out on an opportunity for dramatic growth. One that I think about time and time again, and I'm excited because this author has a new book coming out called The 20-something Treatment that is all focused on mental health in your 20s. This comes out in April of 2024. I'm very lucky to receive an advanced reader copy by the publisher of it. I am pumped. I got high hopes. Talking Across the Divide by Justin Lee. How to communicate with people you disagree with and maybe even change the world. Navigating difficult conversations can be a little overwhelming, and this book I feel like gives so many great tools for how to have better conversations, not so that you can quote unquote win an argument or be better than others, but so that you can actually connect with people in meaningful ways. Especially if you're someone who like steers away from uncomfortable conversations, I think this book has so many great things to think about. I love this part here on page 90. We know that other people's beliefs, especially our opponent's beliefs, are influenced by their echo chambers, but we think our own beliefs are rational and objective, unaware of the influence of our own teams. This is important to understand because it means our opponents think the same thing. They assume we're just a product of our echo chambers and that they're the ones thinking rationally. In short, we assume the best in our own team and the worst in other teams. When I tell you that paragraph has stuck with me since I read it, it has just transformed the way that I view situations now. You know, I've always had this understanding that we are the protagonist of our own story and everyone is the protagonist of their own story. So we're all looking at life through a lens of very much so like that we're the hero, I guess. I don't think anyone thinks that they're the villain in a story. So it helps me in just dropping my ego a bit in conversations or even in how I formulate opinions about others, and not like thinking so highly of myself and my thinking process. I think that at the end of the day, that just creates a lot of space and distance and isolation between you and others. Whereas if you're able to kind of just like at least listen better and really train at becoming a better listener, you end up formulating, I think, even better opinions, or more well-rounded ones at least. Even talking about this book makes me realize, oh, I need to read more books on communication, because communication is a skill like anything that can be exercised and strengthened, but I don't feel like a lot of us get taught or invest time into figuring out how to actually be a better communicator in a non-like business sense. I feel like that comes up in business, but how do we communicate with like people that we're friends with, that we are not friends with, that we're family members with? That can be blurry at times. The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. This is my first book by this author, which is shocking because I feel like I have heard about him for years. Trauma is an inner injury, a lasting rupture or split within the self due to difficult or hurtful events. By this definition, trauma is primarily what happens within someone as a result of the difficult or hurtful events that befall them. It is not the events themselves. Trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside of you. You know, I've definitely heard how like trauma can impact you and trauma can stay with you. But I didn't realize that there were so many different forms of it, both like these big ones and these little ones that can really shape the way that you view the world and the way that you react to situations, and also how it can have ties to your physical health. It comes up time and time again in so many books how dangerous stress can be and how important it is to manage stress, because it really impacts our immune system and how our body physically operates. At its core, I just feel like this is a book that really encourages you to take charge of your personal beliefs and to realize that you're an active participant in shaping them. You don't have to be a victim to them. And that can be really powerful in determining future outcomes of instances of illness or hardship, obstacles, things that we all kind of have to go through in some way, shape, or form throughout life. Fierce Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. How women can harness kindness to speak up, claim their power, and thrive. Now, compassion is a topic that is also tackled in The Myth of Normal briefly, but this one just really gets into it. I don't know about you, but I can be my own worst critic with so many things, with how I think, how I react, what I do. And for some reason, the expectations I set for myself are so much higher than those that I set for others. Like if someone else told me that they had this reaction or are struggling in this area, I would have so much easy compassion for them and easily be able to see that just because this thing might not be working doesn't mean that them as a whole, that there's something wrong with them. But like we can do that to ourselves, is we magnify things. And when I find myself doing that, I think about this book and the tools that it really gives you. Each chapter has exercises, journaling exercises that you can do that really are meant to help generate some more self-compassion in your life. It really talks about how self-compassion is not self-esteem and why self-esteem is nowhere near as powerful as self-compassion. And I really just love the push it has to listening and becoming in tune with what your body needs and honoring whatever it is that it needs at a given moment without judgment. And actually, Kristen Neff is one of the two people that have actually created a program called Mindful Self-Compassion. It's a program that I have heard come up time and time in my life. Another program I have heard come up time and time again is the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which is created by the author of Full Catastrophe Living by Jon Kabat-Zinn. This is probably the book that I've read the most recently of all the books here. I freaking love this book. Oh my goodness, I think it's so powerful. The subtitle of the book is Using the Wisdom of Your Body and Mind to Face Stress, Pain, and Illness. And that's what this book is really about. It's giving you tools and emphasizing the importance of breath work and yoga movement to get us through these really tough obstacles. I actually find that the three of these books together have a lot of overlap, and I find that comforting to see, because when you start to see patterns in especially nonfiction books that you read, it almost feels like puzzle pieces are coming and clicking together. Like, I don't think any of these on their own are insignificant, but together it's like, wow, it really just shows like how everything is interconnected. I've been a big meditator for years, so I wouldn't say that I was like turned on to meditation because of this book, but I think it really validated how important of a practice it is for my well-being. And since reading this book, I have made sure that my meditation practice in the morning is kind of a no debate situation. I have to do it. I like meditating in different ways, doing the 10-minute daily calm, doing YouTube guided meditations, or even trying to make activities in my life a little bit more meditative, my brain a little bit more quiet to them. So, you know, I find like drawing and coloring and Lego building and baking, those can be really meditative activities as well if you are going into them with intention. So within the book, there's a lot of like exercises and suggestions on things to do, but one of the ones that he talks about is the body scan. And it's funny because I actually just brought up body scans in my newsletter this week. I have a weekly newsletter that goes over like mind, soul, and body activities. So if you want to check that out, there's a sign up link down in the description box below. But the body scan is a meditation style that I always recommend to beginners because it gives you something to do. I think a lot of people struggle with just sitting down and meditating and being like, okay, I don't know how this is good for me. My brain can't stay focused. And you can kind of pull yourself out of the experience quite easily. But if you have something mentally to do, I feel like it's a little bit easier to stay on track with it. So a body scan involves you starting at your toes and slowly moving your focus up your body to different body parts as slowly as possible and just observing what you're feeling. Maybe it's nothing and you kind of numb out. Maybe you feel an itch or some pain. It's just learning how to become in tune with your body, because when you stop and stay still and do like a body scan, you realize that there's a lot happening in your brain that might be distracting you from things that are happening here. And at the end of it, once you reach the top of your head, typically you can kind of feel a little bit more mellowed, zenned out, relaxed, because you just kind of released all that. I was so excited to see body scans brought up here because my first introduction to body scans and meditation was when I was 15 years old. I had a piano teacher who was also a vocal teacher, and every time I went in for my piano lessons, we'd start talking about life, and she would always give me some great life wisdom during my lessons. I always joked that they were like half therapy, half piano lessons. And one of the things she always emphasized to me was, Caitlin, you have to focus on breathing. And she would actually make me like do breathing exercises with her, even though like I'm not a vocalist and I wasn't there for vocal lessons. That's typically, you would think, something that would happen in vocal lessons. She really emphasized that this was like an important tool for the rest of my life. And she told me to do body scans at night before going to bed because that's what she did to go to sleep. So that was like my first introduction into meditation, and it's been like a part of my life ever since. And I have so much gratitude to that woman for introducing me to a practice that has really just made my life so much fuller. When I'm going through hardships, like I always go back to the breath, and meditation is really helpful for rocky obstacles. And I definitely feel like this book came into my life exactly when I needed it, as a reminder that these tools are there to guide me through the rocky waters. The Wealthy Renter by Alex Avery. How to choose housing that will make you rich. In a world that tends to really overinflate home ownership and romanticize it, this book is the counter argument, the suggestion to maybe not buy a house and to rent instead, and why renting can actually help you build wealth. I think that goes against everything that you think about when you think about renting, because everyone tells you that when you're renting, you're just throwing money away, you're paying your landlord's mortgage, not your own. I think historically there's definitely been a strong argument for that, but we're in scenarios these days where, depending on where you are in your part of the world, I know definitely here in Toronto that housing is a little bit less affordable than it used to be. A little is a very generous word there. So I love the different perspective this author takes on renting, to consider it not as like this negative thing, and to look at the opportunities that come with renting, and how just because you're renting doesn't mean that you can't still be building wealth. So if you're feeling negative about the state of real estate right now, I suggest giving it a read. It is written by a Toronto author. It's written in a Canada lens. Very short read, but I think there's a lot of principles that are applicable to people whether you're in Canada or not. As far as like finance books, it's definitely a take that I don't see often, so I really appreciate that refreshingly different take. Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel is really focused on reframing the way that you think about money, your relationship with money. There are 19 short stories that kind of tackle different aspects about money. So there's luck and risk, confounding compounding, getting wealthy versus staying wealthy, even the concept of how you change, and that means your financial goals will change, but also like your life goals will change. I find like this is a book that probably obviously based on the title of it, The Psychology of Money, has not just like money advice, but also life wisdom in there too. And I really like the chapter on how things can change. You know, I think we can sometimes set these big goals that as we get older or as we change and evolve, we no longer resonate with as much, but we still feel like we need to keep striving towards that goal, even though if a present us might feel disconnected from us. So he really emphasizes the importance in letting go of those and creating new goals as circumstances change, as you change. And I think that's so wise. It's so important to know when it's time to say goodbye to something and when it's time to start something new. Whenever people ask me for like book recommendations in the finance field, I always recommend this, especially for beginners, or not even just beginners. If you're in a period where you're feeling disconnected from your relationship with money, there's just a lot of gems in this, and it's a really easy read because each chapter is kind of its own standalone thing. There's wisdom to gain from so many different areas in life. You know, books are not the only thing. There's wisdom from experience, there's wisdom from people that are older than you, podcasts and documentaries, and you know, the list goes on and on. But I just feel like books have been so great, such a great tool for keeping learning alive in my life. So it just makes me so happy to sit down and be able to chit chat about them. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. I am very curious to know what is a book, or, you know, a handful of books that have had a huge impact on your own life. I'm always looking to build up my TBR list, so please, if you've got a moment, share your gems in the comment section down below. If you want to see more book videos on this channel, give this video a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and I will see you all soon with a new one. Until then, bye guys.
Yeah, she thought she could do anything, thought she could get anywhere. Confident she's number one, and if nothing, everybody's wrong. Used to be calm, now I can't remember how I used to do it. That I was a member of Confidence Club, 'cause that don't last forever.